Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings Against the Grain picks for Week 5. The idea of our Against the Grain picks is we want to look at some of the guys who we think are going to be highly owned and try to find some other guys in the same price range who are guys that we think will go lower owned but are still in really good spots and have some upside that we think we could use them in the tournament to differentiate our rosters and help us reach to the top. So let me call up our slideshow and we can go through the 5 guys who we have on the list for today. The first guy that we have on the list is going to be Odell Beckham for the New York Giants. We're also going to talk about Abdullah of the Detroit Lions, Laney Walker, the tight end with the Tennessee Titans, and a combo of a quarterback and a running back in Drew Brees and Mark Ingram of the New Orleans Saints. The first guy we're going to talk about is Odell Beckham at $9,000. Now, at that price on DraftKings, he's sandwiched between Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, who have both been higher owned in recent weeks. I think Julio Jones is probably going to wind up being the chalk pick this week. And even though I don't like Brown without Big Ben, I do think a lot of other people are still going to be on him, which could send Odell Beckham going under the radar. Now, he plays a San Fran team that's in the bottom third for passing yards allowed per game. So he is in a pretty good matchup and does have a chance to make some noise here. He averages over 10 targets a game, and that number has been ever increasing since the 8 targets he had in Week 1 when he disappointed. Now, at $9,000, he's definitely not cheap, but he is a guy who has the upside to give you a big game. And if he's going to be low owned and against the grain of what most people are doing, he could be somebody that makes a lot of sense for you to use in your tournaments. The next guy I want to talk about is Abdullah. Now, earlier in the season, everybody fell in love with this guy after watching his run in Week 1, where he basically shook Eric Weddle right out of his shoes. He's priced at $4,100, and the guy who's the flavor of the week this week seems to be Todd Gurley, who's priced at $4,300. So if you have Gurley taking all the action of the people who are looking for a cheap running back down there, you're going to have a good chance to get Abdullah pretty low owned. Now, Detroit is at home this week in a game that's expected to stay close, while St. Louis is on the road and expected to be getting blown out by Green Bay. So if you're thinking about it, really the better game script kind of belongs to Abdullah, even though he's not the guy that everybody is talking about. He gets double-digit fantasy scores whenever he has 10-plus touches. The only time he hasn't so far this season has been against that Seattle defense in the last game. Now, I'm willing to excuse a guy who doesn't have a big game against the Seattle defense at Seattle on Monday Night Football, because Seattle is a very tough place to play, and that's a very tough defense to go up against. So even though it was the first game that he was getting some extra carries with Joyke Bell out, most people who used him were disappointed in what he got. So they probably aren't going to be coming back on him this week. If we do get no Joyke Bell again, I definitely think he has a good chance to match or exceed the 15 touches he got in the last game. And I think he's going to have a much higher upside today than he did last time. So while it may be against the grain not to use Gurley and to take a guy whose numbers don't really stand out to you, I think Abdullah is one of those guys that can help push you up in the tournament, because he could have a big game this week, and a lot of people are kind of overlooking him. The next guy I want to talk about is Laney Walker. Now, Antonio Gates is returning at $4,200, and Charles Clay is coming off a huge week at $4,100. So they're going to take a lot of the ownership out of the people who are looking for a cheap tight end in that spot. Walker has 13 fantasy points in each of the 2 games he has played, which would be a really nice return for a guy who's under $4,000 here. He caught 7 of his 10 targets in the last game before being out, and then they went on a bye. Now, the thing about this is he's been out of sight and out of mind for most people. 7 out of 10 targets from a tight end is a really good day. 10 targets from a tight end would put him, up towards the top of the list of most targeted guys at the position. And the fact that he caught 70% of those passes, even though they were kind of short and didn't go for a ton of yards, it's still 7 catches. On a site like DraftKings, that's 7 points by itself, or almost 2 points per every $1,000 of cost you would pay for Walker. I'm not guaranteeing he's going to have another 7 catches this week, but I do think he sees around 10 targets again. And the fact that he's going to see around 10 targets again should help him get a pretty good fantasy score. Now, the thing I like about him is he's finally healthy, so he should see a lot of snaps. In the first game of the season, he wasn't healthy, even though he still managed to catch a touchdown pass, come up with some decent yardage and a few catches, and get you 13-point game. I think Laney Walker has more upside than we've seen out of him, all season so far with only 13 points. He's a guy who could put up a big game like Charles Clay did last week and get you 20 for under 4,000. I also think that he's going to be low owned with Gates and Clay taking up a lot of that ownership, as we spoke about. So I think he's a good guy that you can look to in tournaments. Next guy I want to talk about is quarterback Drew Brees. Now, Brady and Rodgers are having monster years and are only a few $100s more than Brees is. So both of them should see very high ownership. But Brees is not somebody who can be dismissed, as he had 25 points last week, and he's attempted over 42 passes on average per start so far this year. There's a huge total in that game of 49, and Philly is a team that's known to play at a hot pace and give up some big scores last year to quarterbacks and wide receivers. So why would we not think that Drew Brees would continue that for them? He's an underdog and expected to be trailing, so he should be throwing the ball a lot late. And at 7,200, with people going up a little bit more to get Brady or Rodgers, or coming down a little bit more for some of the guys in that low to mid $6,000 range on DraftKings, I have a feeling that Brees is going to be going against the grain and low owned. The last guy I want to talk about is Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram is at 6,100. Devonta Freeman is at 6,300, and he's going to take all the money in this range. Coming off 2 back-to-back 3-touchdown weeks, he's going to be a very popular option this week after people kind of let him go the last 2 weeks at low ownership. Ingram, though, has averaged 19.5 touches per game and over 18 fantasy points per game to go with it. So it's not like he hasn't been having a pretty solid season himself. Brees definitely helps the case for Ingram versus a tough run defense because Ingram catches the ball out of the backfield. And if this New Orleans team is down like Vegas expects them to be, we could see Ingram racking up a bunch of catches towards the end of the game when they're running that hurry-up offense. The price is pretty high with him, especially considering there are a lot of cheap running backs like the Gurleys and the Abdullahs, and even a whole bunch of other guys in that low to mid $4,000 range. So the ownership on a guy like Ingram should be pretty low. Most people who are paying up are either going to take Devonta Freeman or go all the way up to the top and pay up for some of the top options. So if you do that, then you're going to be in a good situation. So that pretty much sums it up for our picks for today. Those are the guys that we're going to be looking at as guys that are against the grain. If you have a chance to draft some of them, it's going to really help you out in your tournaments. While I probably wouldn't use most of these guys in cash games, I do think that there's merit to going away from the chalk and using some of them in a tournament. Thank you for your time, and as always, stay classy, DFS.